Good Wednesday evening, listeners, and welcome to another commentary here on Conversations of a Sister. I thank you for tuning in. For those of you who are tuned in tonight, and to Michael, my one listener who asked the question, do I see the chats live? And my answer is yes. When you chat me live, I do see it. I try not to pay attention to it because I'm too busy paying attention to the commentary here on Conversations of a Sister. But nevertheless, I thank you for tuning in here on this brisk Wednesday evening on the East Coast. And tonight's commentary is lonely versus loneliness. Lonely versus loneliness. Um, yeah, that was a question that I received via email that stood out to me. So I wanted to address that. I guess lonely describes a person experiencing the feeling of sadness or isolation. Um, Lonely describes an experience or feeling of sadness from isolation, while loneliness is a feeling itself. So when you think about it, it's like it's something that we experience at some point or another, and sometimes we don't quite understand it. So, loneliness is a lack of meaningful connection when you're lonely. I remember as a little girl, sometimes we would be like, oh my God, we're bored. We're lonely. We have nothing to do. And my father would always tell us, go in the backyard and play amongst yourselves, And my sister and I, we would get bored. So we would throw these beauty pageants, in the summertime. It would keep us busy. We would actually buy the crown. We would gather up everyone in the neighborhood and we would just throw these beauty pageants because that was our way of connecting. Maybe we were lonely with each other, so we had to connect with other individuals. Now, you can be physically alone without being lonely, and you can be surrounded uh, around people. You can be surrounded by people and still feel lonely. Uh, I think that loneliness sometimes is one state, their state of experience. So this week, in a slew of emails that I received, one listener wrote and said to me, I like being lonely. She said, is there something wrong with that? And I was like, no. And she said, is this something that you can discuss this week in your commentary? And I thought to myself, she said, I like being lonely. But what I believe she actually meant to write is, I like spending time alone. I think that's what she meant. Not I like being lonely, but I like spending time alone. And, you know, when she hears this, if she's already listening, the difference between loneliness and being alone is first to understand why it matters so much. Because it does matter. In fact, it's crucial to understand that loneliness is a feeling. When you feel lonely, you feel lonely. And sometimes when you feel lonely, it's because you're missing someone. You're missing that connection. So it's highly subjective, and everyone will experience it under different circumstances. But I think that we all experience it at some point in life. In this sense of feeling lonely, it's actually wrong to say, I am lonely. Because you can feel lonely without saying I am lonely. Because it assumes that loneliness is a part of you by saying, I'm lonely. I remember when I was working for a company and a bunch of us, we were in the office like late one night, and one of my colleagues walked to the ladies' room, and it was taking her forever to come back. And we were like, you know, where's she at? What happened to her? So me and my girlfriend, my girlfriend now, we went out and she was talking to this guy, and she couldn't get away from the guy, and he started talking to us. He was like, yeah, I was just telling her that I'm lonely. He said, in order to meet people, I've joined a gym. So we realized that he was taking up a lot of my colleagues' time because he was telling her how he was lonely and how he does things to meet people because he feels lonely. And this guy was desperate because it was almost like we were glued. Well, I'm going to say I was. Me and my other colleague was kind of glued to him, but my other girlfriend, she left. And, she sent me a text message that said, call me if you ever get away. But I'm the type of person, I guess because I felt sorry for the guy, I stood there with my colleague and I actually listened to him. But he said, I'm lonely. So this assumes that loneliness was a part of him. And he talked as if it was. Because he said, I go to the gym to meet people. And I think he said on the weekends, I go to the library. Now, mind you, my girlfriends and I, they had a field day laughing at this. Me personally, I thought it was wrong. I did. I thought it was wrong because this young man was being genuine in how he felt. However, at the same time, he was trying to cling to my colleague, not necessarily me, but to my colleague who was already in a relationship. And when we walked up on them at the time when they were talking, she said to him, well, I'm in a relationship. So, I'm not in the gym. And she was just telling him what they don't have in common. But he started talking to her because he felt lonely. That is what he said. So when someone says they're lonely, it's almost like their name or their nationality because this guy was wearing it like a badge of honor when it's really not. But at the same time, I was like, maybe he want attention. I don't know, maybe he want her attention because lonely versus loneliness are two different distinctions. It's an emotion that's fleeting, but it arises under particular circumstances. And I think that in his circumstance, in my opinion, he was looking for companionship because of some of the things that he was saying. So he was just putting himself out there. And I think this is why my other colleagues found it so funny because he was just throwing out there that he was lonely. So we should actually say, I feel lonely, not I'm lonely or I feel loneliness. Just say I feel lonely because you can be in a relationship and still be lonely. You can be in a marriage and still be lonely. You can be in a room full of people and still be lonely. And for me, I can actually be in, oh my God, I shouldn't reveal this, but I will. I can actually be in a conversation and feel lonely because if I can't really relate to someone, it's a part of my personality to kind of like check out. So I kind of check out mentally and I sit there, my mind be thinking, gosh, how do I get out of this? Oh my gosh, what do I say to get out of this? Because I don't, I'm not getting anything out of the conversation. So I can be in a conversation and actually feel lonely So that means I'm talking to someone or talking to people and actually feel lonely because a conversation has to excite me. It has to challenge me intellectually. I have to be excited about what I'm talking about or what I'm hearing. Because if I'm not, I have a tendency to be lonely. I'll be lonely. And when I'm lonely, I'll check out. Not because I don't like being lonely, but because I don't like the conversation. So I feel like it's not a conversation that I want to have. For those of you who may be just tuning in, I received an email this week from a young lady that said she likes being lonely. And it didn't make sense to me until I started grappling the rest of her email. And I said, okay, she's trying to distinguish lonely versus loneliness. Another aspect of loneliness is the gap between expected and perceived social connections because we should be connected socially. And some people are like, no, I'm not. I'm antisociable. I like being alone. I could stay home on any given night and just be alone. I don't have to have a connection at all. Some people are like that. Me, myself, I kind of envy it. I kind of envy when people don't have to have a connection, but I think that people who feel like they don't have a connection, that's also not a healthy place to be in because then you'll find yourself being isolated and you don't want to be isolated because when you are isolated, it's almost like you're cut off from the world and you don't want to be that. I was listening to the news the other day and they were talking about this woman who was found dead in her apartment. And just hearing the stories from her neighbors depressed me because they specifically asked, when was the last time you saw her? And they said 10 years ago. And that blew my mind. How could you live next door to someone and not see them in 10 years without checking up on them? I was like, oh yeah, this is really New York. Because I don't think that I can do that. I think that I want to know, who's around me. Even if I don't talk to them, I want to know something about them because you never know who's around you. And you should not be so isolated and alone and anxious to be alone that you have no outside connection. I think that the quantity of relationship matters. Well, not the quantity, I'm sorry. The quantity of relationships rarely matters. It is the quality. So it is how you view people, it is the quality of those relationships. And I can only speak for myself when I say I like to have relationships that matter. Uh, you just have to. I think that we we come into this world with people, but when we leave we are alone. I i know that she said, this young lady said that what made her ask the question to me is because she read an article that Tracy Ellis Ross had wrote. Tracy Ellis Ross, the blackest actress. And she talked about how she's alone and sometimes she's lonely. She travels alone and she went on with this whole alone thing. Okay, so we come into this world, we're going to leave this world alone. But I think that we have a responsibility to be connected with individuals. We have that responsibility because I will never forget Barbara Streisand's song, People Who Need People are the luckiest people in the world. Because I think that we all should need people. I live in a community wherein I know everyone who lives around me. I know them. I know who live around me. I may not know them personally, like as far as like what they do on a daily basis, but I know them. I know them by name. I know them by the units that they live in. I know them by different conversations that I've had because we share a common goal. And when you share a common goal, that's considered a connection because people should be connected. And you don't want to be so isolated that you'll die, God forbid, and people will say, "Oh my God, I haven't seen her in 10 years." I could not live next door to anyone that I had not seen for 10 years, especially if I've seen them at some point. I would have to check in because you never know what people are going through. Now, I'm not saying be nosy or be a busybody. What I'm saying is be connected with those individuals around you. And you don't have to be so connected that you have to, establish a friendship. If you get a friendship out of it, that's fine. But just be connected with individuals because this makes you think about if you're lonely because you don't have to be. Some people are like, "Oh my gosh, when I'm alone, I go out. I go out to a bar or I go out to a club if I want to be connected. And when I want to be alone, I just want to be alone." I think that it is important as an individual to master being alone, to master doing things alone. And I think that when you master that, you will come to appreciate it, especially as you get older. Now, I remember when I was in high school, I used to like to do things alone. But come on, there was six of us. So I had five siblings. I mean, did you blame me? I was in the house with other people. So when Friday came or Saturday came, I would want to do things alone. And it bothered my father. My father used to be bothered by it. So he used to be like, "Tracy, where are you going?" And I would be like, "Oh, Dad, I'm going to the movies." "By yourself?" I would be like, "Yeah, by myself." "Oh no, let me come with you." And I would be like, "Why?" I don't mind going alone. "Oh no, let me come with you." Of course, I didn't stop him. He was my father. But he was determined to come because he felt like there was this crime in me going to the movies alone. I would go out to dinner by myself. And he would say, "You're going alone?" And I would say, "Yes." "Oh, no, let me come with you." So I found myself going places with my father. And God forbid, I ran into people that I went to school with. They would be like, "Oh my God, Tracy was out with her father," because back then, during that time, oh, God forbid, it's like, "Oh my gosh, she's hanging out with her father." That was like a crime. But when I think about it now, it's just that my father didn't want me doing things alone. I remember when I took my first trip alone, he was having a fit. "Oh my God, you're going by yourself, you're going alone." Yeah, I'm going alone. Because in this life, if you wait for other people to do things with, you will never do them. That is why it is best to master being alone. Now, don't get it twisted. I ain't talking about not having companionship. I'm not talking about not being with someone. I'm just saying master being alone so that when you desire to be alone, you don't have a problem being alone because you like being alone. But being lonely is when you crave a connection and you don't want to be so desperate for a connection that you just hook up with anything or anybody because that is when your self-worth has to kick in. So I'm going to say, in order to combat loneliness, if you are lonely, you have to be connected or you should be connected because you're lonely. Go to a library, uh, go where there are people, get involved in your community, get involved in something sociable, and then you won't deal with loneliness because you have some sort of connection. But when you like being alone, that is time that you spend being alone. I'm so busy these days that I like being alone. And I like being alone during the week. During the week, I like being alone. When I close my doors at night, I appreciate sometimes being alone. And when I want company or when I want to be in the presence of individuals who are in my life, I make that happen or I allow them to make that happen. I think that we have to have healthy balances. You have to be balanced. I remember one time, my girlfriend called me, my best friend. It was a while ago, and she was crying. And I said to her, "What's the matter?" She said, "Oh my God, my mom is in Puerto Rico. I forgot where her daughter was. Her brother was somewhere." And she said, "I just felt so lonely. I felt lonely with them not being here." And I think that she was crying because it gave her a sense of emptiness. She felt empty, but she was dealing with the loneliness. And I think when she spoke to her mom that night, she told her mother, and she said, "Oh my God, I missed you," because she was away, and that was something that she wasn't used to. She said, "I felt lonely, I felt empty," because she felt a void of her mom traveling. So that's an example of feeling, loneliness, because sometimes we just do. Sometimes we crave the company of an individual. And when it's like that, you will feel lonely. But feeling lonely and enjoying being alone are two different things, because you can enjoy being alone in intervals. You don't have to always be alone. It's like your choice. You can be alone when you decide that you want to be alone. I'm going to spend this night alone. I just want to go home and be alone. And I think that it's important. And it's also a privilege when you have that right, because sometimes people just want to be alone. But being lonely is a sense of a feeling within itself. I hope I'm making sense, and I hope that she understands, and I hope that for those of you who are listening, you understand, because when I read her email, I was like, but it's kind of like the same thing. But she needed me to break it down because she said, "I like being lonely," and that's not being lonely. I'm sure what she meant to say was, "I like being alone," because the opposite of loneliness is actually connection. So you can be connected. And for people who are single, yes, I know. People always say, "Oh my gosh, she's lonely. She don't have anyone. She don't have a man." That's that. Let me tell you something. I'm single. That is anybody's go-to. They will say, "Oh my gosh, she's lonely. She don't have a man. Oh my gosh, she's lonely. She don't have a man." How do you know? How do you know what someone has? How do you know? You don't. And you cannot assume that because someone is single, that they're lonely. Because let me tell you, if you're single and you're lonely, that's a problem. Because you may be single all of your life. So you have to be happy and content in that particular state. Because if not, you can attract anything. And you don't want to attract anything. You know how it is when you leave the screen door open, anything flies in. You don't want to do that. You don't want to attract anything. You want to be a whole individual. You want to be a whole person, someone whole, so that when you do have that connection is healthy, and you understand lonely versus loneliness. Because I can guarantee you, when you get in a relationship and you are in a relationship, you want to be, it's going to be times where you're going to want to be alone. People who are in marriages, they have time when they want to be alone. I don't know about traveling apart. I know I wouldn't want to do that. But I know that there are times when they would want to be alone. If I in a relationship, if we're in each other's presence and I'm in one room and they're in another, at some point you start to miss that person because they're there. So because they're there, you want that time. So when you want that time, then you meet that person in the next room or whatever, you call them and you come together because you want them there, because you're done with the alone time. It's like, okay, I'm going over here for 5 minutes to read. Okay, I'm going to be over here watching television. And then when you're done with your alone time, you come together. So those are two individuals who understand being alone versus loneliness. So it's okay to be happy alone. It's okay to want to spend time alone. But when you are lonely and you are experiencing loneliness, the opposite of that is to be connected. Be connected at some point. Just be connected and stay connected, because I think that's important. I remember one time I had a boss that I was very close to, and she said to me, Tracy, you live alone? I said, yes, I live alone. And she said, do you have people who check on you? I said, absolutely. She said, I think that's very important. She said, because I live next door to a woman that nobody checked on, a young girl, and she had been dead for a week. Her boyfriend killed her, and no one checked on her. And these are stories that you hear. So, for all of my girlfriends that are single, we have a pact that we check on each other. In the morning, we'll send each other text messages. Sometimes we'll call each other, but we always check on each other, regardless to how busy we are, because that is important. Check on your single friends, not because they're lonely, but because you have that connection. So, being alone is a choice, is a moment, is a time, is a night, is a day, but it's only a period that can be temporary. But loneliness is wanting to be connected. So, you solve loneliness by being connected. And when you are lonely and you want to be alone, you just make time to be alone. But to say, I enjoy being lonely, no, you enjoy being alone. And there's nothing wrong with that. I thank you for tuning in tonight. And for my one listener who said, I should just rename my show Conversations of a Sister Just Ask Tracy. That's a great idea. I don't know. I'm going to think about it. We have until the new year, so we'll see. But for those of you who tuned in tonight, I thank you for tuning in. Join me next week. God only knows where the conversation will go. Until then, have a great week. Bye.